I am Lily, 29 years old, and I spent 4 years trying to build a tech startup in San Francisco. When my phone rang at 3 a.m., I never expected it would be my dad telling me my apartment building was on fire. What shocked him more than the fire was my response. I laughed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Not a nervous chuckle, but full-blown laughter that left him utterly confused. How could I laugh at losing everything? The truth is, that building was not just my home. It represented something much deeper in my journey. But before I tell you why I laughed at what should have been devastating news, let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up in a coastal town called Pinehaven, where ambitions rarely stretched beyond the county line, and dreams stayed as practical as the fishing boats in the harbor. My parents, especially my dad Gabriel, believed in security above all else. He built his career at the same insurance company for 30 years, measuring success by stability and retirement plans. Mom was more understanding of my creative side, but ultimately supported my father's practical vision for my future. Their plan for me was straightforward: business degree, corporate job, maybe consulting if I was feeling particularly ambitious. But I had been coding since I was 12, building simple games and websites that my high school friends actually used. My computer science teacher, Mr. Delaney, was the first person who truly recognized my potential beyond just being good with computers. While my father grimaced at the startup stories I'd enthusiastically share at dinner, Mr. Delaney helped me develop my first serious app and encouraged me to apply to tech programs. When I received a full scholarship to a prestigious tech university in California, the quiet war at home began. "Technology is volatile, Lily," Dad would say, his voice measured but firm. "For every success story, there are thousands of failures. Is that really what you want to risk your future on?" Despite their concerns, I moved to California 6 years ago with a suitcase full of clothes, a laptop, and the unwavering belief that I could build something revolutionary. That confidence diminished quickly when faced with the brutal reality of San Francisco rent prices and the hyper-competitive tech scene. The first year I rotated between 4 different shared apartments, each with more roommates and less personal space than the last. I worked part-time at a coffee shop while taking classes and building my prototype app during every spare moment. 3 years ago, I found the building in the Mission District. To call it charming would have been a generous overstatement. 5 floors of weathered stucco with windows that leaked during the rainy season. The lobby perpetually smelled of the Indian restaurant next door, and the elevator worked perhaps half the time, but the rent was surprisingly manageable for a studio. And my apartment had fantastic Wi-Fi connectivity and enough space for my small development setup. The building owner, Ms. Geller, was a 70-something woman who collected rent in person each month, rarely fixed anything promptly, but also never raised the rent. She had owned the building for 35 years and operated on handwritten receipts and verbal agreements more than formal contracts. My neighbors formed an unexpected community that helped me survive the early struggles of startup life. There was Marcus, a jazz musician who practiced at reasonable hours and would bring me leftover pizza from his gigs. Elena, a night shift ER nurse who would check my pitch decks during her breaks and offer invaluable feedback. The Chen family on the ground floor who ran a laundromat and would occasionally forget to charge me during months when funding was tight. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Every time I called home, Dad would ask, "Have you gotten renter's insurance yet?" And every time I would promise to look into it next week. There was always a more pressing expense: server costs, prototype materials, conference tickets. When my laptop finally crashed, insurance seemed like a luxury I could postpone indefinitely. In retrospect, I should have noticed the warning signs about our building. About 6 months before the fire, things started breaking with concerning frequency. The water would shut off randomly. The security door to the building often remained unlocked despite residents being careful. 3 small electrical issues in different apartments were quickly fixed but should have raised red flags. Ms. Geller became increasingly difficult to reach when we reported these problems. Not her usual friendly but slow to respond self, but genuinely elusive. Meanwhile, my startup was finally gaining traction after years of rejection emails and investor meetings that went nowhere. A prominent accelerator program had accepted my company, providing not just funding but mentorship and connections that would transform our trajectory. The program was scheduled to begin just 10 days after the night of the fire. I had spent weeks polishing my presentation and preparing demonstration models of our smart home ecosystem that could reduce energy consumption by 40% while increasing convenience. My tiny apartment had become a workshop filled with circuit boards, 3D printed prototypes, and walls covered in diagrams and code snippets. The day before everything happened, I noticed people in business attire examining the building, carrying tablets and speaking in hushed tones. They didn't look like maintenance workers or city inspectors. When I asked one who they were, she smiled professionally and said they were conducting a standard property assessment. I was too focused on preparing for the accelerator program to investigate further. That night, I fell asleep surrounded by components and half-finished devices, completely unaware that it would be my last night in that apartment. The shrill sound of my phone cut through my dreams. At exactly 3 a.m. I fumbled in the darkness, knocking over a cup of cold coffee before locating my phone. The screen was blindingly bright, and it took me a moment to register my dad's name. Dad? My voice was thick with sleep. Is everything okay? Is Mom all right? Lily, I just saw on the news. Your building is on fire. His voice was tight with worry. They're showing it live on the national news. It looks terrible, sweetheart. Really bad. Please tell me you're not there. For a moment, I couldn't comprehend what he was saying. My building? What do you mean? The apartment building on Valencia Street in the Mission. They're saying it started on the second floor and spread quickly. The reporter said the entire structure might be compromised. He paused, his breathing audible. Please tell me you're somewhere else tonight. A strange laugh bubbled up from my chest. Not a small chuckle, but a full, almost hysterical laugh that echoed in the empty room where I was staying. Lily, why are you laughing? His confusion was palpable through the phone. This isn't funny. Do you have insurance like I told you to get? Please tell me you listened this once. I tried to control my laughter, but it kept coming in waves. Dad, I'm not in the building. Thank God, he breathed. But why are you laughing? You're about to lose everything. That only made me laugh harder. When I finally caught my breath, I explained. I'm not home because I'm at the accelerator's guest housing. I decided to bring all my prototypes and equipment here yesterday since the program starts so soon. I was so exhausted after setting up that the program director, Naomi, insisted I stay in their visitor apartment, instead of taking the late train home. The irony was overwhelming. After years of my father warning me about protecting my assets, the one night I needed to not be home, I wasn't. And the most valuable things I owned, my prototypes and development equipment, were safely stored elsewhere. My laughter faded as a horrifying thought struck me. Dad, I need to go. My neighbors. I need to make sure everyone got out. I hung up before he could respond, and immediately started calling my neighbors. When Marcus didn't answer, I tried Elena. No response. Panic rising, I called a rideshare and threw on my shoes, not bothering to change out of the company t-shirt and shorts I'd been sleeping in. 15 minutes later, the car dropped me a block from my building because police barricades prevented us from getting closer. The scene was chaotic and terrifying. Flames were still visible from the upper floors, sending orange sparks into the dark sky. Fire trucks lined the street, their lights painting everything in pulsing red and blue. Water from the hoses flowed down the street carrying ash and debris. I pushed through the crowd, frantically scanning faces for anyone I recognized. The first person I saw was Elena, still in her hospital scrubs, talking to a firefighter. She must have just gotten off her shift. Elena! I called out, rushing over. Are you okay? Have you seen the others? Marcus? The Chens? She turned, relief washing over her tired face. Lily! We thought you might still be inside. They haven't finished searching all the apartments. My heart sank. Who's still missing? The Chens got out right away. They're over there. She pointed to where the family huddled together near an ambulance. Marcus was at a late gig. Thank goodness. But they haven't found the couple from 5C or the engineering student from the apartment across from yours. I spent the next hour in agony watching firefighters go in and out of the building. The fire chief, a composed woman with kind eyes, kept updating us. We're doing a thorough search. The fire appears to have started in an electrical panel on the second floor. The building's old wiring was definitely a factor. Finally, around 4:30 a.m., they confirmed everyone was accounted for. The couple from 5C had been away for the weekend, and the engineering student had been pulling an all-nighter at his university lab. No one was seriously injured, though several residents, including an elderly man from the first floor, were treated for smoke inhalation. As dawn broke, the fire chief pulled several of us aside. I don't want to speculate, she said quietly, but some aspects of this fire are concerning. The point of origin and the speed of spread suggest possible tampering. We'll be conducting a full investigation. Her words hung in the air as we processed what she was suggesting. Could someone have deliberately set the fire? For the rest of that night, our little community gathered at a temporary shelter set up in a nearby school gymnasium. The Red Cross provided cots, blankets, and basic toiletries. Neighbors who had barely spoken beyond hallway greetings now shared their stories and concerns. Some cried openly, while others sat in shocked silence. I found myself in a strange emotional state. While I felt genuine grief for our collective loss and worry about what everyone would do next, there was also an undeniable sense of relief that my work was safe. This relief brought crushing guilt. How could I feel anything positive when so many had lost everything? I curled up on a cot but couldn't sleep. My phone kept buzzing with messages from friends who had seen the news, from Naomi checking that I was okay, and from my parents who were debating driving to San Francisco immediately. As the sun rose fully, I stepped outside the gymnasium to call my dad back. I'm safe, I assured him. Everyone got out safely. Thank goodness. He sighed heavily. But Lily, everything you owned was in that apartment. Please tell me you at least had renter's insurance. The question I had avoided for years now had its answer. No, Dad. I never got around to it. His silence spoke volumes. I waited for the lecture, that I told you so, but instead, he just sighed again and said, We'll figure it out. Your mother and I will help however we can. As I ended the call, I gazed back at the school where my neighbors were beginning to stir. Whatever came next, I knew our lives had fundamentally changed overnight. By 8 a.m., most of us had gathered outside the barricade, staring at the charred remains of our home. In daylight, the damage was even more apparent. The building stood like a wounded animal. Windows blown out, the stucco facade blackened. Water still dripped from the structure, and the air smelled of wet ash and melted plastic. Fire officials allowed small groups to enter with escorts to retrieve essential items. When my turn came, I was paired with a young firefighter who looked barely old enough to have finished training. We can only stay for 10 minutes, he warned, and only grab what you absolutely need. ID documents, medications, that sort of thing. Walking into the building felt surreal. The lobby, usually fragrant with spices from the neighboring restaurant, was now a swamp of water and debris. We took the stairs since the elevator was obviously out of service. Each floor looked worse than the one below, and by the time we reached my studio on the third floor, I was bracing myself for total devastation. Surprisingly, my apartment had suffered mainly water and smoke damage. The fire had been most intense on the floors below. Still, everything was ruined. My clothes were soaked and reeked of smoke. Books had swollen with water and fallen from shelves. The couch where I had spent countless hours coding was waterlogged and stained black. I grabbed my passport from the desk drawer, a backup hard drive with personal photos, and a small wooden box containing the bracelet my grandmother had given me before she passed away. As I was about to leave, I spotted my AWAF journal on the nightstand, miraculously dry under a pile of papers. I added it to my meager salvage pile. Outside, insurance adjusters had arrived and were taking statements. One approached me, clipboard ready. Name and apartment number? He asked efficiently. Lily Chen, apartment 3B. And your insurance provider? I hesitated. I don't have renter's insurance. His expression shifted from professional to pitying. I see. Well, you should know that without insurance, you won't be eligible for immediate housing assistance or reimbursement for lost property. You can check with FEMA and local disaster relief organizations. As he moved on to the next tenant, Marcus appeared beside me. He had come straight from his gig, still in performance clothes, his eyes red from smoke or lack of sleep. Probably both. Did you hear what people are saying? He asked, his voice low. About what? About Ms. Geller. No one can find her. And apparently, she doesn't own the building anymore. She sold it 2 months ago. This was news to me. Sold it to whom? Some company called Westridge Development. People are saying they've been buying up old buildings all over the Mission. As we talked, more pieces began falling into place. The increase in maintenance issues around the building, the mysterious inspectors, Ms. Geller's evasive behavior. A sick feeling grew in my stomach. By noon, a small group of tenants had gathered at a coffee shop across the street. Someone had created a group chat for sharing information, and rumors were flying. Marcus, who had been making calls to friends in real estate, joined us with actual news. I spoke to my buddy who works in property development, he said, his voice still hoarse from his performance the night before. Westridge Development has a reputation. They buy old buildings in gentrifying areas. Then mysterious accidents happen, and suddenly they can demolish the place and build luxury condos. That's illegal, I protested. They can't just burn down a building with people inside. Of course it's illegal, Marcus agreed. But it's also hard to prove. And they're careful. They make sure the incidents happen in unoccupied areas, usually at night when most people would be awake to smell smoke. They're not trying to kill anyone, just destroy the building. As if on cue, a young woman approached our table. She was petite with dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail, carrying a messenger bag emblazoned with the logo of a local news website. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm Zoe Sullivan, reporter with SF Chronicle. I'm covering the fire and was wondering if I could ask you all some questions." Initially, we were hesitant. Most of us were still in shock, but Elena thought having media attention might protect us somehow. One by one, we shared our experiences and suspicions. Zoe took notes rapidly, occasionally looking up with widening eyes. "This isn't the first time I've heard about Westridge," she admitted after listening to us. "There have been at least 4 other suspicious fires in their properties over the past 2 years. Nothing has been proven, but the pattern is concerning." She showed us research she had already compiled about the company. Westridge was owned by a larger corporation, which was in turn owned by an investment group. The web of ownership made it difficult to pinpoint who was actually making decisions. While we were talking, my phone rang. It was Naomi from the Accelerator program. "Lily, I just heard about the fire. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I assured her. "I was still at your guest housing when it happened, remember?" "Thank goodness." "Listen, I know this is terrible timing, but I wanted to let you know the program is still on. In fact, several investors have already expressed interest after seeing your prototype during orientation." A small flame of hope flickered inside me. My work was safe, and the program might actually be successful. It felt wrong to think about my career at a moment like this, but it was also the one bright spot in an otherwise devastating day. As I ended the call, I looked up to see my father walking into the coffee shop. He spotted me immediately and headed over, his face a mix of relief and concern. He had driven all night from Pinehaven to reach me. "Lily," he said, pulling me into a tight hug. For a moment, I was simply his daughter again, grateful for his solid presence. Then he pulled back, and the practical side emerged. "I've already called about temporary housing options, and I brought some clothes and basics for you." He glanced around at my neighbors. "Have you started filing insurance claims?" "Dad," I said quietly, "I told you I don't have insurance." His snubbed expression tightened, but he nodded. "Right. Well, we'll figure it out. The important thing is that you're safe." As the day wore on, our tenant group grew more organized. Elena started a spreadsheet of resources and contact information. Marcus created a fundraising page. Zoe promised to investigate Westridge further and put us in touch with tenants from other buildings with similar experiences. By evening, we had our first direct contact with Westridge. A representative named Michael Burke arrived at the coffee shop dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. "On behalf of Westridge Development, I want to express our deep concern about what happened," he said smoothly. "We're working closely with authorities to determine the cause of the fire." "When did your company purchase the building?" Elena asked pointedly. He smiled thinly. "I'm not authorized to discuss specific business transactions, but I can assure you that Westridge is committed to the safety and well-being of all residents." "Then why didn't you inform us of the change in ownership?" I asked. "And why were there inspectors in the building yesterday without proper notice?" His smile never wavered. "I'm not aware of any inspections yesterday. Perhaps they were from the city." No one believed him, but we had no proof of anything yet. As he left, handing out his business cards, I exchanged glances with Zoe. This was bigger than just my lost apartment. This was about systematic exploitation of vulnerable tenants, and it was happening all over the city. That night, curled up on my father's hotel room couch, I made a decision. I wouldn't just move on and rebuild elsewhere. I would find out what really happened, and hold Westridge accountable not just for myself but for all my neighbors who had lost everything. The next morning, Zoe and I met for coffee before she headed to the city records office. She had agreed to help me investigate Westridge, seeing a potential big story in their pattern of building acquisition and subsequent accidents. "The key is finding connections between the different properties," she explained. "If we can prove they had a financial interest in getting rid of rent-controlled tenants, and then connect that to the fires, we might have enough for the authorities to take action." I spent my day contacting the other tenants, creating a detailed timeline of strange occurrences in the building leading up to the fire. Elena recalled seeing unknown maintenance workers in the electrical panels just days before. Marcus remembered overhearing an argument between Ms. Geller and a man in an expensive suit about 3 weeks prior. My father, meanwhile, was growing increasingly frustrated with my focus on investigation rather than practical matters. "Lily, you need to find a new place to live," he insisted over lunch. "You need to replace your basic necessities. Let the police handle the criminal investigation." "Dad, the police aren't treating this as a priority," I argued. "To them, it's just another building fire until proven otherwise. Meanwhile, these developers are getting away with destroying people's lives." His expression was pained. "I understand you're angry, but you're not a detective or a journalist. You're a tech entrepreneur with a major opportunity starting in less than a week. Focus on that." "I can do both," I insisted, though I wasn't entirely convinced myself. Financial reality was setting in hard. Without renter's insurance, I had lost roughly $20,000 worth of possessions. My bank account held barely enough for 1 month's rent on a new place, assuming I could even find one without paying a broker's fee. The accelerator program provided a stipend, but that was meant to support the business, not replace my entire life. Over the next few days, our once tight-knit community of neighbors began to fragment. Some moved in with family or friends outside the city. Others found temporary housing through relief organizations. Our group chat became less active as people focused on rebuilding their individual lives. On the 3rd day after the fire, Westridge made their move. Michael Burke sent an email to all former tenants offering a, quote, will settlement of $2,500 each in exchange for signing a release of all claims against the company. "It's a trap," Zoe warned when I showed her the email. "If you sign, you can't pursue any legal action against them later, even if we find proof they were responsible." But $2,500 was tempting to many of my neighbors who had nothing. By the end of the week, I learned that nearly half had accepted the offer, including the Chen family, who needed the money to keep their laundromat running. My father became increasingly insistent that I come back to Pinehaven with him. "Just temporarily," he urged, "until you get back on your feet." The thought of returning to my hometown as a failure was unbearable. I had left 6 years ago with such determination to prove that a tech career was viable. Going back now felt like admitting defeat. The accelerator became my sanctuary. Naomi had given me a key, and I often spent nights on the office couch, working late to prepare for the program. My new designs, influenced by the recent events, had a focus on safety and disaster prevention that even I could recognize as powerful. Through Zoe's contacts, we found a lawyer named Cameron Alvarez, who specialized in tenant rights. He agreed to meet with the remaining residents who hadn't settled. Building a case will be challenging, he warned us in his small office packed with files. These companies are sophisticated. They create distance between decisions and actions. They hire contractors who hire subcontractors. Following the money and responsibility becomes nearly impossible. But not completely impossible, I pressed. He smiled slightly. Not completely, but it will take time and resources that most displaced tenants don't have. As we left his office, Marcus sighed heavily. I'm 37 years old, Lily. I don't have years to fight a legal battle. I need a place to live now. His words hit me hard. While I was young enough to couch surf and determined enough to seek justice, many of my neighbors were facing much harsher realities. The pressure intensified when I received a voicemail from an unknown number. Ms. Chen, this is a courtesy call to remind you that pursuit of baseless claims can constitute defamation. Westridge values its reputation and will defend it vigorously. The voice was professional, female, and carried an unmistakable threat. I played it for Zoe, who looked genuinely concerned. They're worried, which means we might be onto something. But be careful, Lily. These people have resources and connections. My dad noticed my distraction during dinner that night. What's wrong? And don't say nothing. I hesitated, then played him the voicemail. His face darkened. This has gone far enough. You're coming back to Pinehaven with me tomorrow. Dad, I can't. The program starts in 4 days, and I need to see this through. See what through? Getting yourself hurt? Or worse? For what? An apartment you didn't even own. For justice, I snapped. For people who can't fight for themselves. Ms. Geller is still missing. Did you know that? What if something happened to her, too? Dad shook his head. You always were stubborn, just like your mother. It wasn't exactly a compliment. My accelerator preparations suffered as I divided my time between investigating Westridge and developing my technology. Naomi began to express concern about the controversy affecting the program. Some of our investors have connections to real estate interests, she explained gently. I support what you're doing, but perhaps we could keep it separate from the accelerator. Even my health began to suffer. I wasn't sleeping well, surviving on coffee and adrenaline. Dark circles formed under my eyes, and I lost weight I couldn't afford to lose. The final blow came when Cameron called with bad news. The fire marshal's report came back inconclusive, he said. They couldn't definitively prove arson. Without that, our case is significantly weakened. That night, alone on the accelerator's office couch, I questioned everything. Was my father right? Was I throwing good energy after bad, fighting a battle I couldn't win? Would it be better to take the settlement, modest as it was, and start over somewhere else? For the first time since the fire, I allowed myself to truly cry. Not just for my lost possessions, but for the community that had been scattered, for the sense of home that had been stolen from all of us, and for the powerlessness I felt in the face of such calculated greed. The morning of my accelerator program orientation arrived with a strange mix of excitement and dread. The workspace looked impressive, my company name on the door of a small office, my prototype displayed on a sleek desk. Naomi had even arranged for a photographer from a tech blog to attend. This could be your breakthrough, she told me as we made final adjustments. Try to focus on today just for a few hours. I wore a borrowed blazer and shoes that pinched my feet. My father stood awkwardly among the tech crowd, clearly uncomfortable but determined to support me. He had extended his hotel stay, unwilling to leave me alone after the threatening voicemail. The early reactions to my technology were overwhelmingly positive. Mentors praised the innovative approach to energy management, and 2 investors expressed interest in early funding conversations. One prototype demonstration went perfectly, showing how the system could detect potential electrical hazards before they became dangerous, inspired, of course, by recent events. I should have been ecstatic. Instead, I kept glancing at the door, half expecting Westridge representatives to appear. Around noon, the program was in full swing when I noticed 3 men in expensive suits enter. They moved directly to Naomi, engaging her in conversation while occasionally glancing in my direction. My stomach tightened. Lily Chen. One of them approached me, hand extended. David Mercer, Westridge Development. Impressive technology. The audacity took my breath away. You want me to create tech for the company that burned down my home? He maintained his smile, though his eyes hardened. That's a serious accusation, Miss Chen. One that could be considered defamatory without evidence. Why are you here? I demanded, aware that nearby conversations had quieted. To appreciate innovation, he replied smoothly, and perhaps to discuss how Westridge might support your venture. We're always looking to invest in local talent. You mean buy my silence? His smile never wavered. I mean create a mutually beneficial relationship. After all, rebuilding a life and career after such a loss must be challenging. Before I could respond, my father appeared at my side. My daughter isn't interested in your support, he said firmly. Please enjoy the presentations and then leave her alone. David Mercer's expression cooled. Mr. Chen, I presume? Your daughter has talent, but talent requires nurturing and stability, something we could help provide. She doesn't need your kind of help, Dad replied. Mercer shrugged. As you wish. But remember, Miss Chen, that reputations in the tech world are fragile. Investors don't appreciate controversy. As they left, the confrontation had been captured by several phone cameras. By evening, the video had spread across social media, paired with summaries of the building fire and accusations against Westridge. My name was now publicly linked with the allegations. The next day brought both opportunity and threat. 2 more investors expressed interest in my technology, intrigued by the story of the entrepreneur standing up to developers. But when I returned to the accelerator's guest housing, I found the door ajar and my few possessions strewn across the floor. Nothing valuable had been taken, but the message was clear. They knew where I stayed. My father was livid. That's it. You're coming home with me today. Pack whatever you need. For once, I was tempted to agree. The intrusion felt violating in a way even the fire hadn't. But then Zoe called with news. I found something, she said, excitement evident in her voice. Property records showing Westridge applied for demolition permits for your building 2 weeks before the fire. And get this. They applied for construction permits for a new luxury building at the same address 1 week before the fire. How could they know the building would be condemned unless they planned it? Her discovery renewed my determination, but the break-in had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. That night, Dad and I had our biggest fight yet. This is not a game, Lily, he shouted, pacing the small guest apartment. These people are criminals. They broke into your place. What do you think they'll do next? That's exactly why I can't stop, I argued. If I back down, they win. They'll just keep doing this to other buildings, other tenants. And what about your life, your safety, your future? Is this crusade worth risking everything? Some things are worth fighting for, Dad. You taught me that. He stopped pacing and stared at me. I taught you to be practical, to build security, not to tilt at windmills. No, I said quietly. You taught me to stand up for what's right. Remember when you stood up to your former company when they were cheating customers with hidden fees? Or when you helped the Johnsons keep their house during the financial crisis by doing their taxes for free? You didn't take the easy path then. He looked away. That was different. How? You risked your reputation, your job security. Because it was right. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I just don't want to see you hurt. I know, I said softly, but I need to do this. He left shortly after, returning to his hotel. For the first time since the fire, I was truly alone with my thoughts. The small guest apartment felt vulnerable after the break-in. Every noise made me jump. Around 3 a.m., exhausted but unable to sleep, I wondered if my father was right. Maybe I was being foolishly idealistic. Maybe this fight was too big for me. With dawn came clarity. I sat by the window, watching the city wake up, and reviewed the accelerator program material. Every mentor session, every workshop, every networking opportunity represented not just income but a connection. Someone had seen my vision and valued it enough to bring me into their program. The realization hit me like a thunderbolt. My technology wasn't just a career path. It was a platform, a voice, a tool even. I could tell this story through my work in a way that might reach people who would never read a news article about tenant rights or corporate accountability. I called Naomi as soon as business hours began. I want to pivot my presentation slightly, I explained. I want to focus on how this technology can prevent fires in residential buildings, especially older structures in low-income neighborhoods. There was a long pause before she answered. That's very different from our original focus on energy efficiency for luxury smart homes, Lily. I know, but it could be more impactful and timely. Let me think about it, she finally said. But in the meantime, you should come to the office. You have checks from investors who were impressed by your prototype. The money from those initial interest checks provided immediate breathing room. I could afford a decent short-term rental, clothes that weren't borrowed, and basic necessities. More importantly, it gave me the freedom to turn down Westridge's settlement offer when they increased it to $4,000. I reconnected with the scattered tenants, proposing a new approach. Instead of just fighting Westridge legally, we would fight them in the court of public opinion. Zoe's articles had already generated interest, but a technology demonstration could reach a different audience. Many were skeptical, but Elena surprised me with her enthusiasm. At my age, you learn that sometimes the indirect approach works best, she said. Hit them where they're not looking. Over the next few days, we gathered at what remained of our building, collecting charred pieces of the structure. Personal items, too damaged to save but too meaningful to discard. Each piece held a story, a fragment of our community's life. Zoe continued her investigation, finding connections between Westridge and several city officials who had fast-tracked their permits. She also located a former Westridge employee willing to speak anonymously about the company's practices. They call it accelerated vacancy, he told us. They never explicitly order anyone to commit arson, but they make it clear that bonuses depend on buildings being emptied quickly. As word of our project spread, housing advocates and tenant organizations reached out to join forces. What had begun as my personal fight was evolving into a movement. One evening, as I was sorting through salvaged materials in my new short-term rental, there was a knock at the door. Cautious after the break-in, I checked the peephole. My father stood in the hallway holding a suitcase. Dad? I opened the door, confused. I thought you went back to Pinehaven. I did, he said, stepping inside. And then I came back. I've taken a leave of absence from work. Why? He set down his suitcase. Because you were right about standing up for what's right, and about me teaching you that. I don't fully understand what you're doing with all this. He gestured at the art materials covering every surface. But I want to help, if you'll let me. It was the last thing I had expected. My pragmatic, security-focused father wanted to join my artistic protest against corporate greed. I also brought something that might help, he added, pulling out his laptop. I've been looking into Westridge's financial statements. Public companies leave paper trails, and financial analysis has always been my specialty. For the first time since the fire, I felt a surge of genuine hope. With my father's analytical skills and my technological vision, we might actually stand a chance against Westridge. That night, Dad slept on my couch, his presence somehow making the small space feel safer. Before falling asleep, I realized that amid all the loss, something unexpected had been gained. My father and I were finally seeing each other clearly as adults with different strengths but shared values. The next morning brought another surprise. Zoe called with news that a whistleblower inside Westridge had come forward, someone with access to internal communications about the accelerated vacancy program. This could break the case wide open, she said excitedly. They've agreed to meet with us tomorrow. When I told my father, he nodded thoughtfully. That's good. But we still need to follow the money. Corporations like Westridge don't make decisions without calculating the financial benefit. As he returned to his spreadsheets, and I to my technology adaptation for fire prevention, I felt a strange sense of balance, the practical and the innovative working in tandem toward justice. It was a partnership I never would have imagined possible before the fire that took my home but ironically might have saved my relationship with my father. With my father's help, our strategy evolved. While I worked on adapting my technology to focus on fire prevention and safety in older buildings, Dad meticulously traced Westridge's financial activities, looking for patterns and irregularities. He set up camp at my small dining table, surrounded by printouts of annual reports and property records. "They're hiding their liabilities," he explained one evening, pointing to a complex chart he had created. "See these shell companies? They're designed to absorb any legal fallout while protecting the parent company's assets." His business knowledge proved invaluable as we planned our approach. We couldn't just expose Westridge's illegal activities. We had to make it financially painful for them to continue those practices. Meanwhile, my accelerator project shifted focus. Instead of creating smart home technology primarily for luxury markets, I redesigned it to be affordable and easily installable in older buildings. The system would detect electrical anomalies, water leaks, and unusual heat patterns, all early warning signs of potential disasters. This isn't just about preventing fires, I explained to Naomi during our weekly check-in. It's about empowering vulnerable communities to protect themselves when landlords won't. Initially skeptical, Naomi was won over when she saw the prototype in action. "This has wider market potential than our original concept," she admitted. "There are thousands of aging buildings in cities across the country." The whistleblower, a former executive assistant at Westridge named Tanya, provided crucial evidence. She had copied emails discussing, quote, preparation work at our building just days before the fire. While not explicitly mentioning illegal activities, the timing and language were suspicious enough to warrant investigation. They were careful never to put anything incriminating in writing. Tanya explained when we met at a quiet cafe far from the Westridge offices. But everyone knew what was expected. Clear the buildings quickly, whatever it takes. With this new information, Cameron felt we had enough to approach the district attorney's office. "It's still circumstantial," he cautioned, "but combined with the pattern of fires at their properties and the financial incentives, it might be enough to open an investigation." My father, who had initially been skeptical of our legal chances, now threw himself fully into building the case. He arrived one morning with unexpected news. "I've been talking to some former colleagues," he said, pouring coffee in my tiny kitchen. "It turns out several of my old clients have investments in the fund that owns Westridge's parent company. They're not happy about being associated with potentially illegal activities." "Can they help us?" I asked, hope rising. "They're putting pressure from the inside. Investors hate negative publicity. It affects stock prices." Our coalition continued to grow. Tenants from other Westridge properties came forward with similar stories. Community organizations offered support and resources. Local politicians, sensing a popular cause, began asking questions about the company's practices. The accelerator program culminated in a demo day where each startup presented to a room full of investors and media. When my turn came, I took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. I came to this program with one vision. I began, but circumstances forced me to see a bigger problem and a greater opportunity. I explained how the fire had revealed the vulnerability of low-income tenants in aging buildings, and how accessible technology could help prevent such disasters. As I demonstrated the prototype, showing how it could have detected the electrical anomalies that preceded our building's fire, I could see people leaning forward in their seats. "This isn't just about smart homes," I concluded. "It's about safe homes. For everyone, not just those who can afford luxury amenities." The response was immediate and enthusiastic. 3 investment firms requested meetings before I even left the stage. A major housing nonprofit expressed interest in piloting the technology in their properties. Even a representative from the city's housing department approached me about potential partnerships. My father stood at the back of the room, trying to look professional but unable to hide his pride. When I joined him after fielding questions, he simply said, Your mother would have loved this. She always said your stubbornness would either be your downfall or your greatest strength. The momentum from the demo day carried forward as our case against Westridge gained traction. The district attorney's office agreed to meet with us after weeks of persistence. The assistant DA, a serious woman named Maya Peters, listened carefully to our evidence. This is concerning, she acknowledged, especially the pattern across multiple properties. But building a criminal case will be challenging. These companies have very good lawyers. So do we, my father responded. And we have something they don't: the truth. It was such an uncharacteristically dramatic statement from my normally pragmatic father that I nearly laughed. But Peters seemed impressed by his conviction. I'll assign an investigator, she promised. But these cases take time, sometimes years. Time was something many of our coalition members didn't have. Elena had moved in with her sister in Oakland. The Chens were struggling to keep their laundromat open without the regular customers from our building. Others had been forced to leave the city entirely. We needed a more immediate victory, and that's when my father had his breakthrough. I've been looking at their inspection records, he said one night, spreading papers across my kitchen counter. There's a pattern of the same inspectors signing off on their buildings, even when there were obvious code violations. You think the inspectors were bribed? I asked. I think we should follow the money. He showed me a spreadsheet tracking payments from a Westridge subsidiary to a consulting company owned by the brother-in-law of the city's deputy building commissioner. This revelation energized our investigation. Zoe began digging into the connections between Westridge executives and city officials. Cameron prepared documentation for a broader corruption case. Westridge, sensing the changing tide, made one last attempt to silence us. Michael Burke arrived at my new apartment unannounced, with an offer that made previous settlements seem trivial. $75,000, he said, sliding a document across my small coffee table. Plus guaranteed housing in any Westridge property of your choice. All we ask is that you end this campaign and sign a non-disclosure agreement. The amount was staggering. It would secure my future, fund my company's growth, solve all my immediate problems. For a moment, I was tempted. My father, who had been silent during Burke's presentation, finally spoke. And what about the other tenants? What about the next building Westridge decides to accelerate? Burke's smile tightened. This offer is for Miss Chen only. We recognize her unique influence in this situation. You mean you want to buy her silence while continuing business as usual? Dad said. I pushed the document back toward Burke. I'm not interested. After he left, my father looked at me with newfound respect. That was a lot of money to walk away from. Some things are worth more than money, I replied, echoing what he had taught me long ago, though neither of us had realized I was listening. The next week brought our first major breakthrough. Based on the evidence we had gathered about the suspicious inspections, the city launched an official investigation into the building department. 2 inspectors were suspended pending review of their cases. Then came news that investors were withdrawing from Westridge's parent company, causing their stock to drop. Financial pressure often succeeded where moral arguments failed. Finally, nearly 3 months after the fire, the district attorney announced a formal investigation into Westridge Development for fraud, reckless endangerment, and potential arson conspiracy. It wasn't a conviction, but it was a start. More importantly, it validated what we had been saying all along. We weren't just disgruntled tenants or conspiracy theorists. We were citizens demanding accountability. The night of the announcement, my father and I celebrated with takeout sushi in my apartment. As we ate from containers sitting on my secondhand furniture, I realized how much had changed between us. I'm proud of you, Lily, he said, reaching for the last piece of tempura. Your mother always said you had fire in you. I used to worry about that. Now I see it's your strength. I couldn't have done this without you, I admitted. Your financial detective work made all the difference. He smiled. Maybe we make a good team after all, the innovator and the analyst. As we clinked our water glasses in a toast, I felt a sense of peace despite all the uncertainty still ahead. Whatever happened with Westridge, my father and I had found our way back to each other through this fight. Some buildings may have burned, but other foundations had been strengthened. The investigation into Westridge moved faster than expected once the corruption connections were exposed. 6 months after the fire, The company faced multiple indictments, including conspiracy, fraud, and reckless endangerment. 3 executives and 4 city officials were charged with corruption. My father's temporary leave of absence had turned into early retirement as he dedicated himself to consulting for tenant rights organizations, using his financial expertise to track corporate misconduct in housing developments across the city. Meanwhile, my company secured its first round of funding, allowing me to hire a small team and begin pilot programs in affordable housing developments. The technology that had been born from tragedy was now helping prevent similar disasters in other vulnerable communities. On the 1-year anniversary of the fire, we gathered for the groundbreaking of a new building on the site of our former home. The settlement from Westridge had been used not only to compensate individual tenants, but also to establish a community land trust that would ensure permanently affordable housing on the property. Elena was back from Oakland to serve on the board of the trust. The Chens were planning to open a new laundromat on the ground floor. Many former residents had secured apartments in the development, ensuring our community would remain intact. As people mingled at the ceremony, sharing food and stories, I found a quiet moment with my father near the construction site where our building once stood. "Did I ever tell you why I laughed that night when you called about the fire?" I asked him. He shook his head. "I always wondered about that." "It wasn't just relief that my prototypes were safe," I explained. "It was a sudden realization that everything I thought I needed wasn't what mattered at all. For years, I had been so focused on proving I could succeed in tech that I had lost sight of why I created technology in the first place." "And why is that?" he asked. I gestured around at the diverse group of people who had become my extended family through this ordeal. "To solve real problems, to make life better for people who need it most. The fire took my possessions but gave me purpose." My father nodded thoughtfully. "I had a similar revelation. All those years I spent pushing you towards security and stability. I thought I was protecting you. But sometimes the greatest security comes from standing up for what's right, even when it's risky." The healing journey had not been easy. The first months after the fire were filled with shock and grief. I mourned the loss of my space, my routines, the small comforts that had made up my daily life. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what we were fighting. Then came the anger phase, fueled by each new discovery about Westridge's deliberate actions. That anger propelled me forward when exhaustion threatened to derail our efforts. It gave me energy to develop my technology, to speak at community meetings, to face down corporate lawyers. The lowest point came when several key witnesses backed out, fearing retaliation. I nearly gave up then, convinced we were fighting an unwinnable battle against forces too powerful and entrenched. My father found me sitting on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by circuit boards and legal documents, utterly depleted. Instead of offering platitudes, he simply sat beside me in silence for a long while. Then he said, "You don't have to carry this alone. None of us do." It was the permission I needed to lean on others, to recognize that collective strength could sustain us when individual resolve faltered. Gradually, healing came through unexpected sources. The tech community rallied around me, offering equipment and expertise. Former neighbors checked in regularly, bringing home-cooked meals and companionship. Even strangers who had heard our story reached out with messages of support. Now, a year later, I had a growing company with a mission that extended far beyond profit. My technology was being installed in affordable housing developments across 3 cities, with plans to expand nationally. The case against Westridge had set legal precedents that were being used to hold other predatory developers accountable. Most surprisingly, my relationship with my father had transformed. The man who once dismissed my tech ambitions as risky now proudly explained my work to his friends, and I had gained appreciation for his methodical approach to problems, his quiet persistence in pursuing justice through systems and structures. "The building across the street is up for sale," Dad mentioned, bringing me back to the present moment. "It's owned by another development company with a similar business model to Westridge." "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He smiled slightly. "I'm just saying our work might not be finished yet. The new land trust could use our experience." I laughed, genuinely this time. Gabriel Chen, housing justice warrior. Who would have thought? Not me. he admitted. But that's the thing about losing what you thought was important. Sometimes you find what actually is. As the celebration continued around us, I reflected on the deeper lesson of the past year. The fire had destroyed my home but illuminated truths I might never have discovered otherwise, about community and resilience, about speaking truth to power, about finding common ground with those you least expect to understand you, and perhaps most importantly, about how loss can sometimes reveal what truly matters. My laughter on that terrible night had been the first recognition of a truth I couldn't yet articulate. That buildings can burn, possessions can be destroyed, but the connections between people and the courage to stand for something larger than yourself can never be taken away. Tonight, looking around at this improbable family we had formed through crisis and struggle, I felt a deep sense of peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, stronger for having been broken and rebuilt. Have you ever experienced a moment when what seemed like a disaster actually set you on a better path? Or found strength in yourself that you never knew existed until faced with a serious challenge? Share your story in the comments below. And if this journey of fighting against injustice and finding unexpected allies along the way resonated with you, please hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories of resilience, and share with someone who might need a reminder that sometimes our greatest losses lead to our most important discoveries. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.